Welcome to Diplomacy and International Relations. You know, the show where we focus on international relations, global politics, and Danish political developments. I'm your host, and today we're looking at something really incredible.
Yeah, we are. I'm excited to get into this one.
Me too. We're going to explore the massive structural and technological transitions that are basically, well, reshaping global sovereignty today. Specifically, we're talking about how artificial intelligence is entirely rewriting the rules of statecraft.
Right, and how nations like Denmark, for example, are racing to secure both their technological and environmental futures in the middle of all this.
Exactly. But hey, before we jump into the analysis, just a quick reminder for you to follow and subscribe so you don't miss our updates. You can also support the show on Patreon, which is awesome because it gets you access to bonus content and our weekly and monthly briefings on Danish politics.
Yeah, those briefings are really worth checking out.
Definitely. The link for that is right down in the description. Also, I need to add a quick disclaimer here. Our sources today touch on some highly politicized scenarios, right? Things like U.S.-China competition, Russia and Ukraine, the China-Taiwan situation.
Right, heavy topics.
Very heavy. So we want to be absolutely clear with you. We do not take sides or endorse any specific viewpoints here. Our goal is strictly to impartially convey the facts and the ideas just as they are presented in the original source material.
Exactly. We're just looking at the data, objectively. Because honestly, that's the only way to understand the sheer scale of what's happening. The whole landscape of international relations is shifting from human-paced diplomacy to what sources call algorithmic power.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I think a good way to visualize it is, well, imagine a high-stakes global chess match. But instead of grandmasters relying on their own intuition, world leaders are getting their next moves whispered to them by these lightning-fast, totally opaque supercomputers.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it fundamentally breaks traditional international relations theories. They just can't explain today's landscape anymore.
Right, because classic realism assumes that sovereign states are the ones holding all the power, right?
Exactly. But AI creates this new dynamic of, well, liquid power. It's transnational, it's highly decentralized, and it's largely held by private tech companies, not governments.
Which is wild to think about. And constructivism is struggling too, right?
Oh, completely. Constructivism relies on human norms shaping reality. But now, algorithms are acting as these non-human norm entrepreneurs. They're basically creating a post-truth algorithmic reality by deciding what information you even see.
So we're moving away from traditional public diplomacy where human analysts synthesize intelligence over, like, weeks or months. And instead, we're relying on predictive modeling operating in milliseconds.
Right, milliseconds.
But wait, if leaders are relying on algorithms to make split-second decisions, what happens when those artificial advisors are just, well, wrong or biased?
That is the big question. The research points to a major psychological trap called automation bias.
Automation bias. Okay, what's that?
It's basically when decision makers are under immense pressure and they just blindly trust whatever the AI recommends.
Yeah.
Because the AI sounds so confident and data-driven.
Well, let me push back on that a little bit. Is the machine actually the enemy here?
Yeah.
Or is the real danger just human cognitive overload? Like, maybe leaders are just so overwhelmed by data that they're basically abdicating their responsibility to a screen.
I mean, the cognitive overload is definitely real. But the danger of trusting the screen is what analysts call the perception gap. Because different national AI models interpret the exact same event completely differently, depending on their training data.
Oh, wow. Okay, do we have a specific example of that?
Yeah, the sources highlight a scenario in the South China Sea. So imagine a U.S.-trained AI model observing a Chinese naval drill. Because of its Western training data, it might flag that drill as an aggressive blockade. But a Chinese-trained AI, looking at the exact same patch of ocean, might view a standard U.S. patrol as a hostile incursion, because its data prioritizes domestic territorial frameworks.
So they're both screaming at their commanders that the other side is attacking. That's terrifying.
It is. And the studies back this up. Research shows that U.S. and U.K. models are actually 25 to 40% more prone to suggesting aggressive responses in conflict simulations compared to Chinese or Russian models.
Wait, really? Up to 40%?
Yeah. Even smaller military AI models show a 35% variance on foreign policy tasks, purely based on what they were trained on.
That is staggering. And it's not just happening in military simulations, right? It's bleeding into everyday life. Algorithms are actively fighting this, like, silent daily war for public opinion.
Exactly. It's completely altering cognitive security through deep fakes and these massive digital echo chambers. The weaponization of information is very real.
Right, the sources talk specifically about the China-Taiwan information front. How are influence operations using AI there?
Well, AI-driven influence operations are subtly normalizing certain narratives and dividing populations from within. It's not always obvious propaganda. And analysts estimate this could sway public opinion on cross-strait tensions by as much as 15 to 20%.
15 to 20% just from algorithmic nudging. So how are traditional diplomats even supposed to fight back against that?
What's fascinating here is that diplomats are actually changing tactics. Instead of fighting the system, ministries of foreign affairs are starting to treat algorithms as audiences.
Audiences, like they're performing for the code.
Basically, yes. They've realized they can't just hack the system, so they mingle with it. They add specific tones or trending hashtags to their communications to breach these digital castle walls, so to speak.
That is wild. They're crafting foreign policy to appease the algorithmic food critics on social media platforms just to get their message out.
Yeah, it's a totally new era of strategic communications.
But here's the thing. If whoever controls the algorithm controls the global narrative, then whoever owns the physical servers running those algorithms holds the ultimate power, right?
Absolutely. And that leads us straight into the global race for digital sovereignty. Because right now, AI power is incredibly concentrated. The U.S. hosts roughly 75% of global AI compute capacity.
75%.
Yeah.
Wow.
And China has about 15%, which leaves roughly 160 other nations almost totally dependent on foreign tech.
Which poses a huge risk for the global south, right? The sources call it algorithmic colonialism.
Right. Algorithmic colonialism. It means these nations become passive recipients of technologies and rules that they had absolutely no part in shaping.
So what does this all mean for the rest of the world? I mean, how are other regions responding?
Well, supply chains are being radically reshaped and reshored to secure access to microchips. China is pushing for total self-reliance. And Europe is fighting back hard with the EU AI Act and a €200 billion AI continent action plan.
Right, and we're seeing startups stepping up too, like France's Mistral AI.
Exactly. We're also seeing the rise of the sovereign cloud. Things like Capgemini and Orange's Blue in France, or NATO's air-gapped Google Cloud. The goal is to keep sensitive data strictly within national borders.
Okay, so this pursuit of sovereign control and systemic resilience, it's clearly not just about digital assets, which actually brings us to Denmark and how they are navigating their own massive structural transformation.
Right, it's a perfect parallel, because achieving digital sovereignty requires the exact same foresight as achieving environmental sovereignty. And Denmark is pushing hard for climate neutrality by 2045.
Yeah, and the numbers are pretty impressive. They're on track for their 70% reduction target by 2030. In fact, EU ETS emissions for Danish industry already fell 15.5% just from 2022 to 2023.
Which is fantastic progress.
Mm-hmm.
But hitting that 2045 goal is going to require immense immediate action. It requires massive domestic infrastructure. Both green energy and biosolutions are existential requirements for national competitiveness now.
Right, things like Power-to-X and carbon capture, utilization and storage, or CCUS, plus building out cross-border hydrogen networks.
Exactly. And just like the AI arms race, the labor and resource requirements are staggering. The Danish industrial sector alone will need 15,000 additional full-time employees every single year up to 2035.
Wait, 15,000 a year? Just for the industrial sector?
Just for that sector, yes. And on top of that, Denmark is currently only 4% circular in terms of resource use, so they need a massive boost in resource efficiency.
Which explains why they recently passed the Green Tripartite Agreement, right? To map out the future of agricultural land use and make sure they can actually sustain this transition.
Exactly. It's all about heavy R&D investment and cross-sectoral supply chain control.
Okay, so whether we're talking about managing a national climate transition or navigating an algorithmic conflict, how do human institutions actually govern all of this? How do we manage this hyper-complex fog of war?
This raises an important question. The consensus right now is the urgent need for a digital Geneva Convention, likely spearheaded by bodies like the UN and NATO.
And what would that actually look like? The sources mentioned 3 core pillars, right?
Yes. First is AI transparency. Second is robust accountability frameworks. And the third, which is arguably the most critical, is a strict human-in-the-loop policy for any high-stakes or lethal decisions.
Meaning a human always has to make the final call. The AI can't just act on its own.
Exactly. But it's also important to remember that AI isn't just a threat. It can be a really vital diplomatic tool if we use it right.
Oh, definitely. There's that fascinating Oxford University study on the Ukraine crisis. They utilized Twitter data from 28 different international accounts to cut through the diplomatic fog of war.
Right, and they used AI to run three specific types of analytics on that data. Descriptive, which asks what is happening, predictive, which asks what will happen, and prescriptive, which asks what should be done.
It just shows that AI, with the right governance, can map out these insanely complex negotiations and actually serve global peace instead of just fueling accidental conflicts.
Absolutely. It's a tool. It all depends on how we choose to govern it.
Which leaves us with a lot to think about. I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to mull over. As these AI models become more advanced and agentic, are we approaching a future where diplomatic treaties are negotiated entirely by algorithms in milliseconds?
While human leaders just stand by and sign the paperwork.
Exactly. I mean, if that happens, who is really doing the negotiating then?
Yeah, is the million-dollar question.
It really is. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you all for joining us for this analysis. Please remember to follow the podcast, and if you enjoyed today's conversation, we'd love it if you could leave a 5-star rating to help expand the show's reach.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
We'll catch you next time on Diplomacy and International Relations.